Hey there, welcome to Blockhead, the podcast where cartoonists talk comics and just about everything else. My name is Geoff Grogan. I'm a cartoonist, animator, and illustrator, and for the next hour or so, I'll be your host in a series of conversations with comics creators about their lives, their work, and comics. So sit back and enjoy. Hey gang, welcome to a new episode of Blockhead. I'm back. Yes, I've been away for a little bit over a month. Sorry about that, but I hope today's interview more than makes up for my extended absence. Today we're talking to the one and only, the great Peter Bagge of Hate. Yes, Peter Bagge is here, the man behind Buddy Bradley and all those lunatics from Seattle and New Jersey is here today to talk about Hate Revisited, to help us celebrate the newly released series of Hate comic books, which are at your comic book shop right now. You can get Hate Revisited #1. It's right there waiting for you. I hope actually that you've got it in hand and you've got your whole collection of Hate comics and your Hate collections. You know, Buddy does New Jersey and Buddy does Seattle and what's the other one? Buddy buys a dump. and your Hate annuals. You got the whole collection. You're sitting there. You can't wait for the words from Peter Bagge. Just like me, I was sitting here with my collection of Hate comics. Couldn't wait to talk to Peter. And Peter is really such a nice guy. Not something you would expect from someone whose doppelganger is Buddy Bradley, of all people, but it's true. And I hope that doesn't ruin his reputation, but he is. He's a real nice guy. And we had a lot of fun talking about a whole pile of different things. This conversation ranges all over the place. So sit back and enjoy, okay? But before we get to that, make sure, okay, first of all, that you run down to the comic shop if you haven't done it already. Get Hate Revisited #1. That's the first thing. Second thing is, I want you to go online and go to daiquirijones.com right now. DAIQUIRI Jones.com, all one word. That's going to take you to my Kickstarter, which is up and running right now and through early July, okay? There's I think 23 days left of this Kickstarter, and it is for Daiquiri Jones and the Space Rockettes, issue #2, which is distinct from issue #1, which was a traditional Golden Age size comic book. This is really exciting. This is a tabloid newspaper on newsprint, full color, 20 pages, telling one big story across 20 pages, each of which is like a separate installment from the Sunday comics of old. So this is like getting yourself an old-time adventure with a kind of absurdist comedic spin to it. It's satire, it's absurdity, it's adventure. It's all rolled into one, and it's a really cool package. I'm really excited about it. I've done newsprint and news tabloid formats before, and this is it's a natural fit. Some of these pages are some of the best things I've ever done. So I hope that you will check it out. It's daiquirijones.com. It's all one word. And it's up through the first couple of weeks of July. So check it out, will you? It's daiquirijones.com. It's a fun project. It's really going to be very cool when it's done. I've done one issue with this company before in newsprint, and it turned out great. So I think you'll see also that there's a bunch of really cool rewards. Among them is your very own ray gun. You can get your very own ray gun from the rewards offered at daiquirijones.com, and it comes in one of 3 really bright colors. So you should go there now, check it out, daiquirijones.com. Join me there, won't you? It's a lot of fun. After you've done that, come back here and listen to the show. Okay, listen to myself and Peter Bagge in conversation. I'll see you on the other side. Peter Bagge, welcome to Blockhead. I've been wanting to talk to you since 1996.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, man. And it's an exciting time to have you here because Hate Revisited has just been published by Fantagraphics. And I think it came out last week. I haven't got my copy yet, I have to tell you. I did pre-ordered it, but they didn't ship it until the day it was supposed to come out. So I don't know what's going on. I haven't seen it. I've seen a
Oh, you
couple.
haven't read it yet, huh?
No, I don't know. I don't know anything about it yet, man. So,
Well, did you want to hold off doing this until you had a chance to read it?
um,
Or you
geez,
just want to dive right in anyway?
let's just, there's so much to talk about in the first place. Why don't we just dive in, and
All
then
right.
maybe we can reconnect after I've read it.
Okay.
I'm excited about that. Just off the top of my head, though, is it the size of? I mean, Hate Revisited. Is it going to be a monthly, bi-monthly, or is it going to be quarterly, or what's the
It's a
publication?
mini series. It's 4 issues. They're going to come out each month. So this one, it's June, July, August, September.
June,
There'll be
July,
a new
August.
issue out. After
Okay.
that, I don't know if there's some huge demand for more, then I'll consider doing more. But for now, it should just be these four.
Okay. And is it are we talking about 48-page issues or are we talking about 24
No,
page?
there's just it's just slim little comic books, 28 pages altogether.
Excellent. Okay, that's great. It's great to have it back. Great to, and there's a lot of enthusiasm, I think, and a lot of anticipation from the fans. So that's exciting. But I guess the most obvious question, right, is the easiest one. It's the one I've got to start with. And why Hate Revisited and why now?
I was asked to do it, mainly by my Spanish publisher. The Spanish editions of Hate do really well over there.
Hmm.
And so a couple of years ago, I did a book signing tour there, went all over Spain, and it went great. Lots of people showed up at all the events. So my Spanish publisher said, "What would you like to do more Hate? We'll give you a fairly generous advance if you would do another Hate book." So I mainly just had to think about how to format it
Uh-huh.
because the first problem was I could just tell when people were telling me, like fans there would ask me, "Do more hates. I want to see more hates." I
Hmm.
could just tell that they were thinking they want to see. They're just feeling nostalgic about Buddy Bradley when he was in his 20s.
Yes.
Those
Uh-huh.
really early hates. And I had always made Buddy Bradley, whenever I was drawing him, he was always roughly 10 years younger than I am.
Hmm.
So it's like, gosh, he's going to be pretty old if I keep doing that. And even though people say to me, "Do more hate," I know they don't want to see him now. Um, so I came up with an idea where it's a mix. It is each issue goes back and forth. There will be black and white um, throwback stories
Okay.
mixed in with present day full color stories about where he's at now and how the two intertwine. So
Okay.
like whatever it is that Buddy's talking about, whoever it is he's seeing, people from his past, his family, etc.
Mhm.
Then there would be flashbacks involving those people.
Oh,
So,
okay.
and I thought, and I was pretty happy with the way it came out.
Hmm.
So I wound up, once I decided to do this, I wound up doing it the old-fashioned way, which was Fantagraphics is publishing it, and
Hmm.
then they'll just do what they always did. Then they send their files to the Spanish publisher, and they have their translator translate it.
Hmm. And how did you approach Fantagraphics? Did you just call them up and say, "Hey, Gary, I'd like to do this again," or?
Well, yeah, no, I just told them what the Spanish publisher said, what they
Uh-huh.
that they asked me and that they offered me in advance to do it. And Fantagraphics said we had no idea you were interested. They said we thought they said that's a great idea. We'll pay you the advance. We'll just and they said the reason we never brought this up is we really didn't think you'd be interested, that you'd be inclined to do this. So
It's interesting to think about how this translates. It's such I mean, time and place are such a big part of Hate. Both Seattle and New Jersey, and Americana is very much, I mean, that whole milieu that Buddy travels in with all his friends seems so much a part of American youth and middle age and whatnot. But I mean, it seems so much embedded in our culture. It's hard to imagine how it translates into the Spanish, for a European community. Have you ever, talked to them about how it reads over there, or do you read Spanish? Do you know how it
no, I
translates?
don't. Unfortunately, I don't. Monolingual.
It's interesting to think
Well,
about because it is so much an American. I mean, to me,
yes.
that's the way I think of it anyway.
Right. And when I first started doing comics getting published, like late 80s, early 90s. There is little to no interest in translating my work into foreign languages.
Hmm.
And I would talk to, especially Kim Thompson, who was one of the co-owners who passed
Sure.
away, but he was a
Yeah.
co-owner of Fantagraphics, and he grew up largely in Europe,
Yeah.
Denmark and Germany, and he spoke like 5 or 6 languages. And when I asked him why my work isn't being translated, he said it's too American. He
Uh-huh.
says what you write about, what you talk about, it is very um, steeped in American culture, and
Mhm.
to the extent that he didn't think Europeans would know what I was talking about.
Yeah, that's what I would imagine too.
But um, it always did well in the UK,
Uh-huh.
in Australia, but who were reading it in reading the American editions of it. They seemed to grasp it just fine. And then slowly the work started getting translated and reprinted in foreign countries. They didn't all necessarily do very well, except for Spain. There was
Mhm.
something about the Spanish edition of Hate that did great.
Oh.
And the only thing that I can attribute that to is my Spanish translator. They
Uh-huh.
would hire this guy named Hernan Magoya, who's also an author in his own right. He writes comics and novels and what have you. And the reason I think he was unique, and the reason I think it did better for them than other foreign editions, is he is literally the only translator who would ask me exactly what certain things mean.
Mhm.
Like, for example, the example I always think of early on was he said to me, one of your characters mentions a guy named Rush Limbaugh. Goes, who? And he says, who and what is Rush Limbaugh? And I explain, he says, because nobody in Spain has heard of him. So I told him, he said, okay, fine, because we have Spanish versions of Rush Limbaugh. So I'll just switch it to that. I'll make it clear what this guy is about.
Uh-huh.
And that when he told me that, I thought, when my French and German and Swedish publishers came across that, what did they do? They never asked me who Rush Limbaugh was, you know?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And so to this day, he's translating the same fellow, Hernan, he's translating the these new hates right now. And I keep getting emails from him saying, what does this mean? What is this a reference to? Like, for example, there's a flashback where there's a Red Fink figure
Hmm.
in Buddy's bedroom from when he was a kid. And so, of course, he asked me, what the heck is this?
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah.
What is this? What is this rodent with RF written? So I explained, he said, okay, okay, great. But again, my work is still occasionally reprinted in Italian and in French. And I'm always amazed that they never ask me. They never ask me these same questions, that he's the only one. I think that has a lot to do with why the French version did better.
Or you mean the Spanish version? Yeah.
Spanish, I'm sorry, the Spanish version, yes.
Yeah, well, it makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, certainly, if there are cultural references that don't translate. Yeah, it makes perfect sense, and it's a shame that the other translators didn't reach out in that
Right,
regard. Um,
right.
at the same time, I wonder if it makes European readers, British readers, French readers, whatnot, curious about who these figures are and if they, bother to go search. Like, I know when I'm reading something I don't understand, I'll say, "Oh, okay, Rush Limbaugh. Okay, let me look it up." And I wonder if those readers would do that. Um, have you ever had the opportunity to interact with fans from Europe and get their take on the series at all?
Well, yeah, because like I told you, I just did this very big book signing tour
Oh, yeah,
in
yeah,
Spain. Yes.
right.
And
And
they rarely were very specific about what was American about it,
mhm.
or they didn't bring up things they didn't quite understand. Something that I would see with my own eyes more and more every time I do go to Europe, and I've
Mhm.
been to Spain in particular like 6 or 7 times, um, is I notice how so many pop culture references and elements that are you would think could be solely America specific appear everywhere. All this imagery. Like for example, I kept in Spain this last time, I kept seeing people wearing Major League Baseball hats and Major League Baseball jerseys, or NFL hats and jerseys and coats. And that surprised me because I know, because I've asked, they do not play baseball in Spain. There's a lot of Latin American players, but in Spain, they do not play baseball at all. Nobody plays it. They built when they had the Olympics in Barcelona. I forget what year that was, way back in 1980 or something.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because they played baseball in the Olympics, they had to build a baseball field. And the baseball field is still there. Nobody plays on it. People walk their dogs on it, and that's it.
Oh
Has
my
dog
God.
poop on it. That's what
Oh.
they do with a baseball diamond. So, and at one point too, like I can remember I was in Barcelona and I saw a man, like a guy roughly my age, and from head to toe, he was wearing New York Mets gear, New York Mets hat, New York Mets windbreaker. He was just a New York Met tote bag, and I was like, is he just, is he an American tourist who can't let American stuff, can't leave his stuff at home? Or is he just the world's weirdest Spaniard? You know? I finally asked somebody this question when I was signing autographs. This was like pretty much the last day I did the signing. And in front of me was this young man, and he had a Kansas City Chiefs baseball hat on. He had a ball cap, but it said the football team, Kansas City Chiefs. So I said, "All right, I have to ask you, are you a fan of the Chiefs?" And he said, "The who?" I said, "The Chiefs, the Kansas City Chiefs." He goes, what is that?" I said, "Your hat. Your hat says Kansas City Chiefs on it." And he went, "Oh," and he took it and he looked at it and then he said, "I just like the colors."
Perfect.
Okay.
It's perfect,
Yeah.
Oh man, it's that's crazy. But it's just interesting to think about. One of the things when you first said it, talked about Spain, not to belabor the point, but there was a question I was going to ask you later, and that had to do with artistic influences. And one of the influences, and I know it's a stretch, but I know that you're a big Bob Clampett fan. But the other influence that comes to my mind when I look at some of those images of Buddy or Lisa or whoever it is, losing their shit, so to speak, I start thinking about Picasso because there's this connection there to some of those, figurative paintings that Picasso where he'd really go nuts and
Right.
with the figure, and I can just see, I mean, not to make a ridiculous comparison, but Guernica is not too far off
Okay, well, that's
Buddy.
interesting. Nobody's ever made that comparison before. It's funny that you mentioned that because my influences are so specifically um, comic
Uh-huh.
art,
Hmm.
um, and to a lesser extent, television. You
Uh-huh.
know, I like when I reread some old comic of mine, I'm hearing Norman Lear. I'm
Uh-huh.
hearing dialogue from All in the Family.
Oh yeah, sure.
Um, but with fine art, gosh, I could not. I mean, there were some fine artists, famous painters who I like more than others. And it's the reason I say it's funny that you bring up Picasso. I always hated Picasso.
Uh-huh.
I
Yeah,
thought
well,
I know exactly what you mean with Guernica and all that energy. I know exactly what you mean.
yeah.
But I always thought his work was kind of ugly, a little
Well,
sloppy and ugly.
yeah, well, Picasso's a big topic, and
Yeah.
he's a fascinating. I mean, he's a fascinating artist, and
Yeah,
he's not
yeah.
too not too far from. He's a big comics fan. And he was a big fan of Crazy Cat, and
Huh.
Crazy Cat appears in references in some of his early, post-Cubist work. But
Oh,
uh,
that's funny.
yeah, he and George Brock and that whole milieu. There were a lot of fans of Crazy Cat there
Huh.
in Paris at the time. But having said that, he was a lot of his stuff wasn't too far. If you look at his drawings, wasn't too far from cartooning.
Yeah,
Uh,
I suppose so.
it
Yeah,
was
no,
just that he worked in a different context. He worked in the
right.
context of painting and multi-million dollar, paintings and drawings and whatnot, instead of the, $10 a page comic
Right.
art. But
Yeah.
still, there is anyway, it's just something that sometimes seeps into the culture and we absorb it from wherever, and we're not always exactly sure. But as I'm reading them, I'm just like, God, there's something really cubist about some of these drawings.
That's funny.
And
And I will admit too that my knee-jerk uh, dismissal of somebody like Picasso is just how, while I was growing up and when I was in art school, how that was held up as the best.
oh yeah,
This is the epitome of art. This is the best visual art you will ever see. These people are the greatest. And the people making these proclamations were also the same people who wouldn't even describe someone like Bob Clampett as an artist at all. You
yes.
know, and I was like, no, well, Bob Clampett's better than this
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah. Well, it's, a lot has changed in academia since then. And I'm speaking as one who teaches in a university in the art department there. And
Oh, which university?
it's called Delphi University. It's in Long Island, of all
Yeah,
places.
sure.
And
So are you
so,
in Long Island now?
no, no, I live in upstate New York, actually.
Oh, whereabouts, if you don't mind my asking?
I live in a place well near the city of Binghamton, a small city called
Okay,
Binghamton. And as a matter of fact, though, we do have a similar connection. I know you grew up in Westchester and Peekskill, as I understand,
right.
right?
Yes.
My parents moved. I grew up here, but my parents in '78, the year I graduated high school, they moved to Westchester County and to an area called Pound Ridge. I don't know if you know the Pound
Yeah,
Ridge
sure.
Irrigation or not.
Sure.
Yeah. So they moved there, which is where I met my wife several years later. But nevertheless, so that was fortuitous in that regard. So I spent some time there, although I didn't hang out in Peekskill much, although there were a couple of bars, I think, that we used to frequent that were friendly to younger people in those days. So I do know a little bit about Peekskill, but not a lot. But you picked up and not to jump around, but what the hell? You
Okay.
picked up and moved from Peekskill pretty quickly, if I understand, right? You
Yeah, as soon as I could get out of there, and it was, like my wife, she we met in art school. She was growing up in Long Island. She was always determined to move to New York City. She wanted to live in Manhattan. She knew that like from the age of 12. I didn't have some New York City dream. I just knew that I had to get away from my hometown,
hmm
wherever that would happen to be. And it was just, I had to do something. And being growing up in a suburb of New York City, what the heck? I applied for art schools in New York City.
Yeah.
One was dumb enough to accept me, and that's how I wound up in New York.
Uh-huh. And you
So
met
yeah.
you met your wife at SVA.
Yes, yes,
Uh-huh.
at the School of Visual Arts. Yeah, I only went there for a year though, or a year and a half, 3 semesters. That's how long I went.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting. My wife also went to SVA, and she lasted just about the same amount of time, actually, before she left, for
Uh,
her own reasons. But so after you left school, then your journey took you where?
after I left school, part of the reason I quit school is I ran out of money real quick. Had to, and just to pay my rent, I had to get a job. I had to get a day job. So I had a vague notion of I'll see if I could save some money and then go back to art school. But
Uh,
what happened was instead, again, while I had these day jobs, and then when I'd go home, I would practice my comics, I started meeting other cartoonists. And I should back up a little bit. It was when I started going to art school, that's when I discovered underground comics. I
hmm
caught brief glimpses of them, like a kid might bring one to high school, but there was nowhere in Peekskill to buy them. I couldn't find them anywhere. Now that I'm in the city, there they were. And I
Sure.
went crazy as soon as I saw underground comics, that format. And the way I always describe it is how these underground cartoonists, how they used the format of a comic book the way a painter uses a blank canvas. It was just a way to completely express themselves. There were
Yes.
no Twinkies ads.
Yes, exactly.
They made up all their own characters. They wrote it and drew it. There was none of this division of labor.
hmm
So when I saw that, I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. Exactly. So then from that point on, I was on a mission. But of course, I had a lot of, my cartooning skills were really crude. There's an awful lot I had to learn. So yeah, so when I'd get home from my day job, I would just sit and just draw every day. And then over time, I started to meet other cartoonists, professional cartoonists. Um, and that was pretty much when I realized it would be insane of me to go back to art school because there was one artist in particular. It was the guy who used to do Punk Magazine, John Holmstrom.
Hmm.
And I was at his apartment and I asked him about color separations. I had no, like I said, how do they make those printed colors on the covers of comic books and magazines? So you know how to do it, but I have no idea. So this was back in the Rubylith,
Sure.
Amberlith days, the overlays. He
Hmm.
says, "Oh, this is how you do it." So he showed me like a finished version. And then he says, "Yeah, he just showed me all the steps." In a half an hour, I knew how to do color separations, and I realized that would have been an entire course at
Yeah.
SVA.
Yeah.
I would have had to keep showing up twice a week to learn this. He just told me everything I needed to know for free in a half an hour.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. Yeah. People have no idea. I mean, how complicated people who are, always work digitally have no idea how complex it, at least to the
Yeah,
uninitiated, it seemed. I always
yeah,
found it to be daunting. I was like, oh my God, how do they
yes.
do
I
that?
know. Yeah, yeah. And especially since you can't see the colors.
Right.
All you have is red and then some uh you
Totally.
could put a stick on the zipatone to get some halftones and lighter colors. But you don't know what it's going to look like until it's printed.
Yeah.
And then more often than not, you're horrified
Yeah, right.
at
Because
the
it's nothing like you
results.
imagined.
But
Yeah.
um, but yeah, just recently, there were a couple of young artists visited me. These guys in their 20s, early 20s. They came to my studio, and they were wondering about that. I
Hmm.
was talking about what a godsend. Like these guys were born like after Photoshop was invented,
Yeah.
but I was explaining to them what a godsend Photoshop was.
Sure.
And they said, "Well, what did you do before then?" So I showed, pulled out some old overlays, and they were just like, "What?" They're like, "What am I look? How is this possible?" It's like it was not easy. It wasn't easy.
No, no, not at all. And filled with all kinds of daunting, pitfalls. But
Yeah,
so that being said, so yeah, so you didn't go back to school. You were meeting and hanging out with other cartoonists, and you were doing some work in New York, right? You were
yeah,
getting published.
yes. It was like all through the 1980s. It wasn't until like maybe 1989 that I was making a five-figure income. Oh, it was. I mean, my wife, thankfully, she made more money than me. So, and she was fine. She was totally supported me spending all of my time
Hmm.
doing comics, even though it was a real struggle for the longest time. But yeah, I was starting to get published here and there. High Times magazine, Screw magazine.
Hmm.
It was funny how me and my friends used to always joke about how with our cartoony drawing style,
Hmm.
our two customers were uh, uh, people who marketed to like adolescent boys, like Topps Bubblegum Company, magazines that were ripoffs of Mad Magazine,
Yeah.
or porno magazines.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like dirty old men and 12-year-old boys. They seem to have the same taste in visual art because that was where we got all of our work from, is those two.
It's interesting to think about. Screw published a lot of underground cartoonists, right? I mean, they published
Yes.
Crumb, and they kept a lot of people, busy over the
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
And as well as obviously younger folks like yourself coming up.
Sure.
Um,
And they would, it used to be the whole time I was doing work for them, I guess that started in the very late 70s and then all through the 80s. Their art director or art directors were almost always cartoonists.
oh, how
So,
interesting.
yeah, so there was somebody that a lot of people don't know, somebody named Yossarian.
Oh,
And he
sorry.
was he was an underground cartoonist. His work would appear in the East Village Other. Uh, he was like just a dabbler in underground comics, and
Uh-huh.
then yeah, became an art director. But when I got to know Robert Crumb, I told him that the person who gave me work at the Screw was an old. I said, "Do you probably know this guy, Yossarian?" And Crumb said, "Oh yeah, what a great guy, and he was a good artist too." So
Huh.
it, I think that made him a little bit more interested in what Screw was doing, how they were using all these cartoonists.
Yeah.
Another person too who would call me up and offer me work there was, you must know Drew Friedman.
Sure. Hmm.
Yeah, his older brother Josh Friedman was an editor there. So
Oh,
Josh would give me work. I can remember once one job he gave me. A lot of it would be a lot of what they would do, a lot of articles, things that they would publish would be motivated by whoever Al Goldstein, the publisher of Screw.
yeah,
He was always at war with somebody.
yeah.
So one time, I think he was sued because he used the Pillsbury Doughboy in a lewd way, and it was just like some tiny little aside. And so Pillsbury tried to sue him, and he won. He would fight everybody in court. He wouldn't give an inch, and he won. And so Goldstein said, "So now that I've established I could do whatever I want with the Pillsbury Doughboy, he had me do this three-page X-rated comic of the Pillsbury Doughboy."
Oh, golly.
And yeah, there was another one too where uh, Goldstein, who of course was Jewish, and so was Josh Friedman. Most of the editors there were Jewish, and but somehow he ran afoul of the Hasidic community
Oh.
and he wanted to give the finger to them. So they hired me. I didn't write it, but they hired me to draw this again, another three-page feature of just the most. It was all directed at the Hasidic community with the hats and the curls and everything and the beard and all dressed in black. But it was like the most insanely anti-Semitic imagery you could think of. And I said, look, I agreed it was work and it was funny, but I'm like, look, I'm not Jewish. Are you sure that I'm the art? And you have a lot of Jewish contributors. Are you sure that you want me to draw this? And they said, that's why. We were thinking, who's the most goyish artist we know? And that's why they gave it to me.
Oh my God. Always thumbing his nose one way or the other.
Yeah.
Boy, yeah, it's the oh boy. But it's interesting the whole thing about the Doughboy. He probably set a precedent there in regard to copyright issues, at least for a brief period of time. Uh,
Right.
you know,
Well, it was mainly what he did was use the Mad Magazine argument. It was for satirical purposes.
sure, sure,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But that that didn't get what's the Air Pirates.
Oh, right, right.
You know,
Yes. Yeah. Well,
that
of course, well, Disney were they were fanatical.
yeah, Disney's fanatical,
Disney, they
so
were insane.
they'll just
Yeah.
keep going. They've got lawyers.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
So there's no winning with Disney, no matter what. They'll outlast you. They've got the money
Yes.
and the lawyers. But okay, so what now? I'm curious. Did your wife go on to complete her degree at SVA and go
No,
into?
she quit the same time I did. She was in the same exact predicament that I was in, where neither of us came from money.
Mhm.
So it was the same with her. But she suddenly developed an interest through her work, just through the jobs she would get. She
Mhm.
would get jobs as waitresses, and while she'd be waitressing somewhere, she would move on to becoming a cook.
Oh,
And that was like a big passion of hers was cooking.
oh,
So,
great.
so she actually was getting enjoyment out of her day jobs,
Uh-huh.
and then eventually, and this is why we moved to Seattle. She had a sister that was living out here, and so we moved out here so that she and her sister could start a New York style delicatessen.
Oh, cool. Oh,
Yeah,
that's great. And did that take off?
yeah. Well, they had it for 8 years. It did well.
Oh,
I mean, it didn't get rich off of it, of course, but they paid the bills for 8 years.
sure. Well, yeah, running your own business is well, that's, wow, that's a big one.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and lots of difficulty there usually as well, because well, you know why. Better
right.
well, actually, my wife ran a business too, so I kind of understand. Um, so so okay, so you're living in New York, you're together. Did you get married then, or did you get married later?
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
got married.
well, we lived in Manhattan for 5 years, and then for 2.5 years we lived in Hoboken, New Jersey.
Oh,
So
okay.
we got married in Hoboken City Hall.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Hoboken. Oh my God. Yeah. Okay. I only know Hoboken because when my wife and I many back in the early 90s we moved to Brooklyn from yeah, actually from here from upstate New York. And we moved to Brooklyn, and before we moved into Brooklyn we were looking around in Hoboken, and Hoboken was well beyond the price range we could afford
yeah, that's
for
pretty
renting
funny.
for
Uh,
an apartment. Yeah. I mean, thinking
uh,
about that. But anyway, so you lived in Hoboken for a while. So that's your
yeah,
connection to Jersey.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes, and but even before I moved to Hoboken, New Jersey, I was placing the Bradley when I started doing stories with Buddy Bradley and the Bradley family. I would say Jersey, and it was for this simple reason. I grew up in Westchester County, but
Right.
when you say Westchester County,
Yeah.
people think Scarsdale.
Yes.
And they think leafy upper middle class suburbs.
Yeah.
When you say Jersey, people just think, "Bleh," just suburban slop, suburban semi-industrial. But that was more what people think of when they think of Jersey. That was much more in keeping of where I grew up and where my wife grew up.
Yeah.
We weren't in the rich parts of Westchester County.
Right.
You know,
Right. Yeah.
so
Westchester County is very, very diverse economically. I mean, although my folks moved to Pound Ridge, and it's relatively a very now, particularly, it's a very wealthy area made up of
sure, yeah,
movie
no,
studios.
it was farms and
Yeah.
rich people's mansions
Yeah, and
or
and
rich
my
people's farms.
my wife was among one of the families that founded that area, but they were by no means wealthy at all.
Right,
They were the kind of people who had to build their own houses, and
sure.
the whole family lived there for a while, but then they got priced out of the air of the town that they founded. So,
Yeah.
you know,
The
Westchester,
the only I
yeah,
was
I'm
just
sorry.
gonna say the only people I know that I went to high school with, the only ones that still live in Westchester are the
Mhm.
ones that still live in their parents' houses,
Uh,
who never moved out.
you've never moved out.
But everybody else, we had to flock to the hills.
Yeah.
Even my own siblings, they all moved to the Catskills, much farther up. You know,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, people would be surprised if they don't know Westchester, how, diverse it is. And I know Peekskill was a working class town, lots of places. I worked in Mount Kisco for a number of years, and again, I worked in a factory in Mount Kisco. That's how
yeah,
different,
yeah. I worked in Pleasantville
Oh, okay.
at Reader's Digest.
Yeah.
I
Oh
worked at
my
the
gosh.
Illustrated
Yeah.
Bureau.
Yeah.
Yeah, Reader's Digest.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, famous, I don't know. Are they still there? Is Reader's
I
Digest
don't.
still
That's a
publishing?
good question. I don't even know if Reader's Digest, in any way, shape, or form, is still in business.
Yeah, I don't either. It was such
Yeah.
a powerful, media empire for a while there. And
That company started, and I sorry if you already know this, I don't mean to bore you,
no,
but
you're
that
not at
company
all.
started. It was a
Hmm.
couple who already had money. They made a
Okay.
lot of money doing something. I don't know what.
Hmm.
And the whole idea of Reader's Digest was we want to make a place, we want to create some kind of a business that is totally nice to work at. We
Hmm.
want to make sure that every single person is making it, nobody's overworked, everybody's making decent money.
Hmm.
Um, and so the idea of Reader's Digest was simply they reprinted articles from other magazines. They had
Right.
their own little magazine, but every article in it was from another magazine. They
Hmm.
also were very conservative, so they were a bit notorious for cleaning up what they
Yes.
published. The same
Censorship.
with novels. They would publish a ground Poe and edit out parts they thought were a little too gross.
Yes. They were always abridged novels, right? They were
Yes.
the compressed
But
version.
but to everybody's surprise, including them, the company made money.
Yeah.
The whole idea was just to make a nice place to work, but it wound up being incredibly profitable at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah, my father-in-law, who's long since passed away, was a pilot, and he flew for Reader's Digest. He actually flew their company plane. That was his job.
That
And
was your
my
that was
father,
really? I'll
yeah,
be darned. So
yeah.
he must know everything I just told you. He must
Well,
know.
he did, although I never really talked to him about it. My wife and he didn't really get along very well. Divorced family, all of that business. And but he was a pilot for them, and he flew during their heyday. He flew all kinds of, he flew the governor of New York. He flew all kinds of people for Reader's Digest,
Yeah.
because they became that powerful
Yeah.
force.
Yes.
Really surprising when you think about it, but they were. Um, and that was part of what made Pleasantville successful as an economy. This has got to be a way off topic for people who are,
Right.
who are interested in hate,
Talk
but it
about
is.
comics.
I know, right? It is interesting to me though. But okay, so you know, you went to Jersey and Hoboken, and you were there for a couple of years, and from there you went to Seattle.
Yeah.
Is that what happened? Okay.
Yes.
And so you opened the restaurant out there and tried to establish yourself. So what happened once you got to Seattle? I mean, you know, you move out there, that's a huge change in everything. I mean, you're somebody from the East Coast, you grew up out there, and all of a sudden you're on the West
Right.
Coast.
Right.
And aside from the disorientation of the time change,
Right.
um, your wife is starting a business. It's got to be a precarious time in your life.
Well, yeah, it is. But at the same time, we were very excited.
Hmm.
We loved Seattle. For some reason, most people, well, we're from New York City, so everybody and all of our friends were cultural snobs. So they thought we were moving to Palookaville. They just figured, oh, there's going to be nothing to do there. You're going to go to drive-in movies. But amazingly, Seattle was incredibly cultural city. It had so many bookstores, so many art movie houses. And after New York City, it had like the second biggest theater scene.
Oh,
The city was full of professional actors.
wow.
Um, so yeah, artistically, culturally, we weren't deprived of anything. And but at the same time, it was cheap. It was so much. It's not cheap anymore. God, it's so expensive there now.
Hmm.
But we were able to afford a house. We bought a house for $60,000, and
Wow. Is this the late
and
80s or when?
yeah, 87,
87.
1987.
Uh-huh.
I still things were getting slowly better, but it was like a real struggle for me career wise. I should back up a little bit and get again by saying before I moved, I met Gary Groth and Kim Thompson of Fantagraphics.
Hmm.
And we made a tentative agreement that they would let me do my own comic book, which was my dream. That was even their idea. I showed them some new comics I was working on, and they said, "Would you like your own comic book?" And I said, "Yes, of course." So, but then there was a gap there because I was relocating to New York City, I mean to Seattle, sorry. And Fantagraphics at the same time moved to outside of Los Angeles.
Hmm.
They didn't like it there, so 5 years later they moved to Seattle. But anyhow, it wasn't until we all moved west that then I was able to start working on what became Neat Stuff.
Hmm.
But Neat Stuff did okay, relatively speaking, but it still I was barely making what you would call a living off of it.
Hmm.
Where everything clicked was when I switched to doing hate, when I switched formats, switched titles, and came up with this new comic book. And that's when my career really took off. It sold a lot better than Neat Stuff ever did right out of the gate. It sold way better. And also because of that, I suddenly was getting a lot more lucrative job offers to do illustrations. I was always trying to supplement my income with illustration work, but nobody wanted me. And it was funny, all of a sudden, I didn't need the illustration work anymore, but it was coming my way anyway. It's like when it rains, it pours, you know?
Hmm. Did you have an agent?
No, I never had an agent.
Never had an agent. So they were just approaching you through your connections at Fantagraphics or through.
Yeah, or they just they saw my mailing address inside my comic book and they would just write and say, would you like to? So some of it was for like, mainstream publications like Details and Entertainment Weekly,
Mhm.
but most of it was for more like rock magazines
Mhm.
and it's still all of a sudden I was doing illustration work for Hustler magazine,
Mhm.
which paid fantastic money. They were really generous. And but also I started doing a lot of record covers, which is
Okay.
something as a kid I always wanted to do. That was like a real fantasy is to draw a record cover.
Mhm.
All of a sudden I was doing a lot of them. Very few, very, very few were for um major record companies. They're mainly
Mhm.
for independent, but even the independent companies offered me decent money. They totally made it worth my while.
Oh, that's, well, of course, this all started to happen when hate started taking off.
Yes.
Is that right? So,
Yeah.
and you said, so it's interesting. I've got so many questions that come to my mind as I'm thinking about this. I mean, obviously, hate. that became emblem, and Buddy Bradley became emblematic of a whole scene, a whole
Yes.
rock scene, which we know as grunge, but which is another issue. We'll get into that. But what do you think was it that, I mean, you were still working with Buddy Bradley and the Bradleys in Neat Stuff, right? So,
Yes.
so when you made that transition from Neat Stuff to Hate, I mean, one, what was the catalyst for that transition, and why do you think, you know, it was Hate that took off and not Neat Stuff?
Well, Neat Stuff was doing better all the time, but it was in dribs and drabs.
Hmm.
Uh, and also within the pages of Neat Stuff, it was kind of a one-man anthology. I was working with a lot of different characters, like Girly Girl and Studs Kirby and Junior, Chet and Bunny Leeway, and then there also were the Bradleys. But over time, the Bradleys were starting to take over. I kind of hit a wall with those other characters, but and it isn't surprising that I was having more ideas for the Bradleys since both they and especially Buddy Bradley were the most autobiographical.
Yeah.
That was the most direct connection to me and my family and the world I grew up in and still lived in. So, more and more pages of Neat Stuff were being devoted to Buddy Bradley, and they also were the ones that got the best responses. I did a couple of issues of Neat Stuff that were just Buddy Bradley stories from cover to cover, and they got the best response from the readers. They sold the best. So it seemed like a no-brainer to start with a new comic book and have it all about Buddy Bradley. Make it have like this signature character. I also, with the title Hate, at one point I thought of calling it Hey Buddy, but this was a problem I had with Neat Stuff. When I named my anthology Neat Stuff, a lot of people, their first impression of it when they'd see it was that it was for kids.
Uh-huh.
That sounds like a kid magazine. And of course, it was so not for kids. So that caused a bit of conflict. That was a bit of a problem with this product that at first glance seemed like it was for kids when it definitely wasn't.
Yeah.
So if anything, I overcorrected in the opposite direction. I thought of calling it Hey Buddy, but I said Hey Buddy still sounds kid-like. I
Hmm.
feel like I'm still going to have that problem. I got to make it obvious that it's for adults. So that was one of the reasons I settled on Hate.
Yeah, and that was a very fortuitous choice, although, oddly enough, it's one of the things, and I mean, no offense by this, but it's one of the things that put me off it initially,
Okay.
was the title, because I didn't want to read something that I assumed would be, obviously coming from a negative place.
Right.
And yet at the same time, I mean, we got past that fairly quickly, but initially I'd see the title and I'd go, yeah, I don't think so. And people would talk about it, but I
Yes.
just wasn't, it was a title that sort of put me, but I'm always late to the party anyway. So,
Well,
um,
this title switch and what to call it, I had a lot of conversations about this with Kim Thompson,
mhm,
um, who's by that point was my main editor.
mhm.
And at one point I said, for that reason that you just described, I said, it's not purely negative,
No,
which the word negative implies. So I wanted to call it Love and Hate. But
uh,
they had another comic book called Love and Rockets.
right. Yeah.
Kim said, you will completely screw up our record keeping if you call it Love and Hate. So then jokingly, I can't remember if it was me or him, jokingly said, what about just hate?
Mhm.
And then we laughed because like, no, we're not going to do that. We can't do that. But then the next time we talked to each other, I remember Kim saying, I can't think of anything better.
Mhm.
And I said, yeah. And as an artist, thinking graphically, hate, it's just one short four-letter word
Yeah.
that would be a real eye-catchy logo,
Mhm.
just like mad, something
Sure.
short and snappy.
Yep. Yeah,
And again, like I said, we couldn't think of anything better.
and it certainly stood out, I mean, there's
Yeah,
no doubt about it. And when people talked about it, I mean, it was easy to identify. Uh,
right.
Not only was your style easily identifiable, but the title was too. So everybody, it just, easily just recognizable. You walk into the comic shop and that one word title popped right off of the
Sure.
shelves. Hey gang, Geoff here, taking a moment to interrupt today's interview and tell you all about my current Kickstarter at daiquirijones.com, which runs until July 17th. When you enlist on the radio rocket with Captain Daiquiri Jones, you'll receive a big 20-page full-color tabloid newspaper, each page of which is like a weekly installment in one big story. It's big, colorful fun. It's Captain Daiquiri Jones and the Space Rockettes, the Sunday Adventures. But that's not all. When you join the Space Rockettes and me at daiquirijones.com, not only will you learn some cool dance steps, but you'll have access to some nifty rewards. So don't let the radio rocket blast off without you. Visit daiquirijones.com today. That's daiquirijones.com. And now back to our show. Talking about Kim Thompson, he's a figure I think sometimes when we talk about Fantagraphics these days gets lost in the story. How did you find working with Kim Thompson?
Well, he was very smart, and he was an extremely intelligent person, well-rounded, well-read. Um, I knew instinctively that he always had my back, that when push comes to shove, he was always willing to support me in doing what it was that I wanted to do. I mean, he never completely got in the way of suppressing my self-expression.
Mhm.
That said, he was very in his own way, he was very combative. It
Oh.
it was like pulling teeth to get a compliment out of him. He was
Uh,
always it was mainly he was like not in some Donald Rickles kind of way, but he was very insulting.
oh God.
But he's speaking of being overly negative, he was very negative. If I sent him a new issue, uh he would just hash over everything wrong with it. It was
Oh,
to the point where it's like, does he hate my comic? Does he hate me? He was so in that sense, he was difficult to work with. There was a lot. It was funny that we often would argue, but his demeanor was like, "We're not arguing." That's like I'd be yelling and screaming. He would just be sitting there back there like a Buddha, just like letting me rant. And it's like he would be completely oblivious to the fact that I was furious. It didn't register with him that he was totally pissing me off. And I
mhm.
know other artists that had similar experiences with him about that. Something Here's something that really pissed me off was I was at his funeral, his memorial,
Mhm.
and so people are eulogizing him, and there was women who worked for him at Fantagraphics, female artists, women that worked for him. They would get up and they'd be crying, and they were talking about what a sweet man he was, how sweet, and never a harsh word. He was always so kind and soft. And I turned to, I think probably it was Eric Reynolds,
Mhm.
still is, and I turned to Eric and I said, "Am I at the right funeral?" Is are they lying? It's like really he never was cross or harsh or demeaning or derogatory towards them ever for a single second. And Eric said, yeah, he was always incredibly nice and polite to women. That pissed me off so much because it's like, oh, so he knew how to be a decent human being.
Oh.
He actually knew how to do it. It's just that when he's talking to another guy, he chooses not to. But if he's
Wow.
talking to a woman, then he's all of a sudden he magically turns into a kind, thoughtful person.
Yeah. Oh, that's oh gosh, that's tough. So, did you ever really get a sense of you knew what he was after or where he was coming from so that you could like, you know, prepare yourself for
Well, he was he wanted he wanted me to make good comics and he wanted to publish good comics. The same with
Mhm.
Gary Groth and now
Sure.
Eric Reynolds. They if they believed in you enough to publish you, then like I keep saying, when push came to shove, you would have their support,
Mhm.
and they gave me a lot of leeway. There was very, very little editorial interference. There's a couple of times I could think of like one or two times with Gary and also with Kim more often because they mainly worked directly with Kim, where he really didn't want or like certain things in the comic book, things I was writing and saying. And we would argue, But but the thing is, he would always let me do what I wanted.
Oh.
Always.
Hmm.
But it's just, it would be a loud argument, but he would never say, sorry, you're not doing it. That would seem to be that was a Fantagraphics policy is, they would, when push came to shove, you really want to do this, go ahead and do it. I had my say, but do what you want to do.
Did you ever find yourself, thinking about what they had said to you and then making a change, or did you always find that that was not?
Well, sometimes especially with Kim, sometimes I would have certain notions, and again, they were just notions. I'd be like, maybe in future issues I could do this or add this little feature, do something like that. And if I was iffy about it, if I was on the fence about it, and Kim really didn't want to do it, then I'd be like, okay, all right, let's drop it. I won't do it because I'm not that committed to it anyway. And if you hate that idea that much, then we won't do it. So I guess he had some pull in that way.
Hmm. Hmm. So Hate is its first few issues are coming out. It's starting to. About when did you know that Hate was really a hit?
Right from the very first issue. It
Right from the
just
first issue.
yeah, the first issue probably still is the best-selling issue because they had to keep reprinting it.
Hmm.
Um, again, that's a weird thought, reprinting a comic book, which is a periodical, but they wanted them left on the shelves. It wasn't unprecedented because that's what, like Zap #1,
Hmm.
that's been reprinted a gazillion times.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, so yeah, so with Fantagraphics, they would think, well, if there's a demand for it, if there are some stores out there that don't care if this comic is 5 years old, we'll keep reprinting it.
yeah.
So yeah, the very first issue sold really well. It was, and so all of a sudden I had like a legitimate career right from the first issue. Yeah.
Fantastic. And your interactions with fans right from the beginning were, um were they kind of very, passionate, or was there that kind of response where you heard from fans through letters and things of that nature that
Right.
you know got you motivated, or just.
Yes. That was one of the things that I loved about comic books.
Mhm.
It's 24 to 32 pages long, so you can get it out there quicker. And especially if you're doing a series or a continuing story, when it comes out in comic book form, while you're working on the next issue or the issue after that, you're getting feedback. You're getting letters from the readers expressing under no uncertain terms what they liked or didn't like about what you were doing. And then that would all just go in the hopper, it would all make you think about maybe I should do more of this, maybe I should do and it wasn't like I was just always pandering to whatever I presume the fans wanted because for one thing, they didn't all want the same thing, they didn't speak with a uniform voice. But that was always a factor. I liked getting a response from something I was working on while I was still working on it. That was the most difficult thing when I was forced for economic reasons when all of the alternative comic book industry switched to graphic novels. When
Yeah.
it came a book, all of a sudden you are totally invested in this 100, 200 page tome. Spend years working on it, and you have no idea what people will make of it. You have no idea if they'll like it or not. So for that, and that was why I was thrilled that Fantagraphics was fine with me doing these new hates, this hate revisited as have it come out as a comic book. Um, they normally in the past they would have turned that idea down because comic books became money losers.
Yeah.
But something happened for all kinds of complicated reasons. I think it had a lot to, oddly, it was when companies like DC really scaled back on the amount of comics they were putting out every week.
Hmm.
Comic shops were suddenly desperate for something to fill up their shelves. They
Right.
had all these, on Wednesday, there had to be a whole slew of new comics.
Yeah.
And it was around that time that the recently departed Ed Piskor, he made a series called Red Room,
Yes.
and he had to come out initially in comic book format. And it
Oh.
sold great for that reason. The comic shop owners were just like, a comic book, great.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
need comic books. So Fantagraphics said, all of a sudden, we're doing great with an old-fashioned comic book. So then when I proposed Hate Revisited as a comic book, they were totally fine with it. They said that sounds great.
Yeah, yeah. Which suits you perfectly. You know,
Yeah, yeah. No, this is. I'm really happy about this.
I mean, it's wonderful
Somebody
when
even
you.
somebody even asked me, "Are you going to have?" It's too soon. The whole four issues are completely done, but since the comic shop owners nowadays they expect it to come out every month, so I had to get it all done before the first issue was even in print. But people have asked me, "Are you going to have a letters page?" Because apparently a lot of the people who remember the old hates remember the letters pages.
Yes, which were particularly active and
Yes, yes. I wonder how that would work now if people would want to see their words.
well, there it's interesting. Whether yeah, you're right, because everybody's always expressing their views online and on
Right.
Discord or wherever it is that they do that, on
But
message.
then, but you express yourself online, but then if you go, uh-oh, I shouldn't have said that, you can delete it.
Hmm.
Whereas if I printed, and also I shape the context of the letters. I rarely printed an entire letter exactly as written. I would just take out certain elements that I thought were interesting.
Sure.
And there have been instances like I remember I printed part of a letter from some young guy who he liked my comic, but he had found Jesus and he was worried that I was going to go to hell. So I ran this letter by him talking about how he's really worried about not just my soul, but the souls of all of Hate's readership.
Oh my
So I
God.
printed that. And then years go by and I ran into him and he said, I don't believe that anymore. And I feel so stupid. He so regrets that I printed that letter. But he also was like, hey, it's my fault. I wrote it. I sent it to you.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's where it was at that time. I mean, it's
yeah,
will
yeah.
change. But it's interesting though to hear that, because obviously Buddy, it's interesting. I mean, Buddy and his whole crew, I mean, they push buttons all the way through, uh, on particular ideas or topics or whatnot. But at the same time, there's this visceral kind of honesty about all of them and that particular time in one's life, if you're living that kind of life. Um, that is authentic. I mean, one of the great things about Hate is how authentic it really feels to its world. And that's there right from the start and never flags, I think. I mean, how did you maintain that? Because I can only assume as time went on, your life, I mean, as you were saying, Buddy's 10 years younger than you, but at some point or another, your life really diverges greatly from where Buddy Bradley's life goes and
Well,
where that
yeah. Well,
all
I
this.
made him, like over time, like in the Hate annuals, the last things prior to what I'm doing now, last things I did with Buddy Bradley were like in the aughts. I would do a story about him, once a year in Hate annual.
Hmm.
And he became an entrepreneur, which
Right.
isn't that he was self-employed, which isn't that far from what I do. But
Hmm.
I never ran like a business the way he does. Although I guess you could say that I do. But I'm an artist and he isn't.
Hmm.
Uh, but other than that, there are a lot of parallels. Like when you read this, there's an awful lot about Buddy's life when you're reading these new Hate Revisited, where present day Buddy and Lisa is very, very similar to my own life and
Ah,
experience. Yeah,
okay.
so yeah.
Interesting. But I mean, for gosh sakes, you come across as a person, and this is the first time we've ever spoken, but you come across as a very soft-spoken, very kind, nice person to interact with. Buddy, on the other hand, now it's not that it's I can't imagine that Buddy is like you because the person I'm talking to right now is just so seems so nice and
Right.
so rational and Buddy on the other hand and also just so I don't know reasonable and it's not that I find Buddy unreasonable I don't but I think Buddy has also got this he lives in this milieu that is seedy that is you know well, what's a better word for it than that? I don't really know. It's there's drug cultures all around him, and I can't imagine that this is the world that you're living in, or have.
Well, again, you're thinking of Buddy when he was much younger, and
True.
then he spends the rest of his life trying to. There's a lot of stories I've done about him where it's all about distancing himself
Yeah.
from troublemakers. And
Right.
that's again in these new hate revisits, that's a frequent topic of conversation if is him desperately trying to distance himself from troublemakers.
Right. Yeah.
And both in the stories that take place in his youth and what's happening in his life now in the present day. But
Well, yeah.
but with Buddy, I right from the start, it's like yes, he's me, but also just to make him a more entertaining comic character, I made him more abrasive.
Hmm.
He has fewer filters than I do, or maybe no filters. He just says what he thinks.
Right.
Although I did, being a New York native, being that way, acting and talking that way, shooting from the hip, so to speak, isn't that rare. New Yorkers are generally speaking pretty abrasive,
Hmm.
and there's I never thought of me particularly that way, but I sure came across that way when I moved to Seattle. That was the biggest cultural difference I had to get used to. Is like one famous incident. I wasn't living here for very long. Some cartoonist friends, they invited me to a dinner party, and one of them brought a date, and she started talking. I don't know what brought it up, but she started talking about how much she loved the Bill Cosby show. Back when it was this is the 80s, when that
Hmm.
was like the most popular sitcom. And she
Hmm.
goes, "Oh, I love the Bill Cosby show." And I just said, "Really?" Because I hate that show. And she started crying.
Oh my.
Just because I disagreed with her. And
Oh
I did.
my.
I think it was like on my mind. I think I was like, I kept reading about what a popular show he was. And I thought Bill Cosby was a riot when I was a kid, when he was a stand-up comic. So I think I had just tried to force myself to get into it, which only made me hate it even more, that show. So I think that's why I blurted it. But everybody in the room got so mad at me because she was crying. Just because she was crying, that automatic. But I was just like, this would have never happened in New York City.
No.
Nobody, they could be the biggest Bill Cosby fan in the world. Nobody would start crying if somebody said they hated that show.
That would be an interesting discussion, perhaps even an argument, but
Yeah.
nevertheless,
I
this
mean,
so
and of course, that whole story takes on a different context when you think about what happened with Bill
I
Cosby.
know, my God. Oh my God. What a yeah, and to this day, I can hear some of those Bill Cosby routines from those records,
Yeah.
and there's this one where these kids are riding these go-karts, and Bill Cosby is doing the go-kart sound, and the go-kart sound is na 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 na, and it goes over and over again. And to this day, I hear that sound, that song in my head in certain situations. I can't get it out of my head because those records left such an imprint. I mean, we listened to them
Sure.
over and over and over again as kids.
Right. Yeah, no, they were unbelievable. They were so fucking funny,
They
you
were
know.
so funny, and so was he, and so it was a shock, obviously. But you never
Yeah.
don't ever put your faith in celebrities, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, I'm
I do,
totally not on board with this whole idea of if some famous person, some artist, musician, comedian does something uh to disgrace himself, that you should ban his or her work.
oh yeah,
I will never deny myself listening to Michael Jackson
sure,
records,
of course. Yeah,
you know.
and I'm with listen, I've had this discussion with some of my colleagues too, and there is this idea that, okay, if an artist gets canceled and nobody now we disavow Picasso, we disavow this one and that one because, in their life maybe they were reprehensible, maybe they weren't. I don't know. I wasn't there. But what we're left with is the work, and the work communicates something, and it communicates something that is of importance, that connects, that we can relate to one way or the other on some level. All of us have those attributes within us that are distasteful, one way
Right.
or the other, and so to disavow the work because somebody had this or that proclivity, or which, to be frank, as much as we know, we don't know. At the same
Right.
time, is really absurd because you go back in history. I mean, Caravaggio was a murderer, but the paintings are fantastic. you know.
Right.
David painted, the French Revolution, and the French Revolution led to beheadings and, the terror. And yet David was a great freaking painter. Um,
Right.
there are
Well,
lots
and
of assholes.
the other thing too that people lose sight of talking about all this stuff is when you think about these disgraced artists and their bad behavior, a lot of what fueled their bad behavior was their greatness. They were
Mhm.
famous, they were talented. People worshiped them. They literally worshiped them. They
Yeah.
were like whatever they were, whether they were a stand-up comic or an actor, a painter.
Hmm.
Uh, you'd think of these people who were regarded, if not by everybody, at least a large segment, as the best.
Yes.
They were worshipped. All these people we're talking about were worshipped, and that so one thing, they were very enabled.
Yeah.
People eagerly enabled them, and
Yeah.
that gave them cover, that gave them protection,
Yeah.
and they just got this sense of entitlement that made their bad behavior get out of control.
Yeah.
They would just think, wherever I go, people make allowances for me. People
Yeah.
are eager to let me do whatever the heck it is I want to do.
Yeah.
And so for that reason, I think that this will always be a problem. You
I,
give somebody an inch and they'll take a mile.
I,
And there's always going to be somebody that has more power than the average person,
Mhm.
and they'll take advantage of it. And initially, other people will let them until there's a whistleblower. Somewhere along the line, there'll be a whistleblower who's, wait a minute, you know,
Mhm. Yeah.
why any of them take to the point of murder is beyond
Yeah.
me. But
Well, there's an aspect of it that's perverting, really, to the psyche of an individual when there's that many people who are sycophants, all around you, and you're surrounded by them all the time.
they get no pushback.
No pushback whatsoever, and there is within each of us the potential for monstrous behavior.
Yeah,
And
sure.
and if it's enabled enough, no one ever contradicts you, no one ever stands up to you and says, hey, that's a really, shitty idea, or that's a really
Yeah.
reprehensible point of view. Nobody
Or
ever.
you could say, well, you think it's a shitty idea, but
Yeah.
these thousand other people say go for
Yeah,
it.
exactly. And so that so that kind of culture is is really poisonous in a lot of ways. And it says something about us as well, that we've enabled such a culture, particularly through, cinema, through the 20th century into the 21st century. I know it exists before that, but not to the same level, I mean, when you're talking about global, adoration, for whether it's Taylor Swift, or who seems to be like a perfectly nice person, but what the hell do I know?
Oh,
Uh,
we'll learn more.
yeah, exactly. Someday we'll hear something, and that we'll find distasteful, and then somebody will disavow her records. But then they'll say, "Well, wait a minute. There's a couple of songs here." Oh, but,
Yeah,
yeah. That's a whole nother huge bag of worms. But how do we even get onto that? I forget now.
I don't know. And again,
Bill
continue with this
Cosby.
digression. There's a podcast. It's very well done. There's a podcast called "The History of Rock and Roll in 500 Songs."
Ah,
Have you heard of it?
no, I haven't, but it sounds great. I'd love it.
It's very good. It's a very straight-laced sounding English scholarly fellow. But what's interesting about it is the guy who's doing it is who's making it. I guess he must be from like some academic background.
Hmm.
Uh, while it might not be fair to describe him as woke, he's very sensitive to what in the current world, what goes and what doesn't go, what flies and what doesn't fly.
Hmm.
So he has disclaimers before each episode. And it's and so far I've barely gotten into the 60s. I listened to all these 1950s people. So Chuck Berry, Jerry
Uh-huh.
Lee Lewis, Jackie Wilson, all really bad boys. They were
Sure.
naughty, naughty boys.
Yeah.
And so he keeps doing these long disclaimers about them. There's like one old country singer, Spade Cooley, who he even says, I don't even want to go into detail. I'm not even going to play a song about him because his behavior was so bad. And I'm like, now you're sending everybody to YouTube to listen to Spade
Yeah,
Cooley.
exactly right. We're all gonna go find the song anyway.
And also, when he keeps talking about it, it's like, okay, you don't want to talk about this guy because of his bad behavior, and that musician because of his bad behavior, and this guy. And it's like, we're talking about rock and roll. It's
Yeah.
like, why did you pick this subject? Talk
Yeah.
about the history of needlepoint, then you would
Excellent.
have to have these disclaimers.
Well, I have to agree with you on that. When it comes to okay, Chuck Berry, right? I don't need a disclaimer about Chuck Berry. I don't really, Chuck Berry's Chuck Berry. Without Chuck Berry, we don't have the next 50 years of music, really.
Sure.
Chuck
Yeah.
Berry is like the foundational figure, in
Yeah.
rock and roll. And so you're gonna put it, I mean, please, Chuck Berry speaks for himself, and I don't really need a disclaimer
Right.
before I hear about Chuck Berry.
Yeah.
For gosh sakes, and exactly, rock and roll made its money off of bad boy behavior. That was the whole idea. That was part of the
Right. That
attraction.
was the appeal.
Yeah,
And that's just it too, is like he keeps describing that sort of thing as these guys, what they sang about and the way they behaved. It was like this enactment of a male fantasy. This is male fantasy. And I keep thinking women love them.
yeah, they did.
Women volunteer offered their bodies for Chuck Berry to pee on,
Yeah, or I mean, Elvis's swiveling hips. What was that about?
Yeah,
And who did that
right.
appeal to? Well, I mean,
Yeah, he wasn't swiveling for me.
right, or me either. But there are lots of folks who it did appeal to, and it wasn't because he was a good dancer.
Right.
It was sex, and
Yeah.
so I mean, gosh, there's at some point or another you have to have a reality check, and there's the I mean, sex was a big part of what sold rock and roll to begin with. So to imagine that it's going to be squeaky clean and aren't going to be stories is just to be completely, I don't know, you as you said, you might as well talk about a different subject because
Yes, yes, yep. I know.
anyway, it's fascinating digression though, and I'm
Oh,
gonna have to
yeah.
listen to that podcast. I find that podcasts, I listen mostly to music podcasts. I don't know why, but that's where my interests always seem to go, rock and roll and all of that. So that's another good one
It
to add.
is a good one. This guy knows his stuff. It's very thoroughly researched. That's why I do listen to it.
Yeah, cool. I'm looking forward to it, and it makes sense now talking to you because I mean, okay. Not to belabor a point, but a lot of your reputation in the 90s anyway, and the reputation of Hate and Buddy Bradley was that it was emblematic of, a particular scene, slacker scene, grunge scene in Seattle at the time, which just, as I understand, was just happenstance. It was synchronicity.
Yes.
But you can't, I mean, it's something that I think it's like after it's there, it's kind of unshakable, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah. I mean, but I mean, that was kind of do you find it looking back on it was a good thing or a bad thing, or how do you relate to it?
It was well, like I told you, he was selling really well right out of the gate. And then it was like wasn't until like issue 8 and 9, which people would refer to as the grunge issues, quote unquote, because Buddy wound up managing a band
Hmm.
that fit that description. But uh, but that word hadn't even been coined yet when I was drawing those comics,
Right.
and that didn't boost sales at all. All
Uh,
of a sudden, here 9 issues later, I did a couple of grungy themed stories. And that was and then it was by then, 1991, 1992, that's when Nirvana became this phenomenon. And then other bands followed. All of a sudden, it went from being like this very niche market to mainstream, super popular music. And that the only problem that I have is this assumption that Hate sold as well as it did because of grunge. Grunge, once it became a thing, it didn't boost my sales at all. It had zero effect on sales.
Interesting.
Yes, and also, like I said, I did those stories before
Hmm.
that was the thing. I was aware of that world just because, I was familiar. I lived in Seattle, and there were a lot of bands who were playing that kind of music, which, like I keep saying, that word didn't exist yet, grunge. They were just, I don't know how they would describe themselves, but
It was
and
like
I
a post.
mainly knew of them because I knew of the record company owners and the store owners and their managers. It's kind of like I was friends with the people who were exploiting them.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
Yeah. The people who were taking their money and who then gave it to me. Those are the people I knew.
Well, and was that because you were being hired to do illustrations for them, or?
Yes. Yeah,
Uh,
mostly. Yeah, primarily they would hire me to do illustrations for them. And then more often than not, I would become friendly with these people, you know.
hmm and so it's interesting. They sought you out as an illustrator for records, for their record covers prior to the grunge issues and prior to that whole explosion.
Yes.
Oh, that's
Yes.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although that continued afterwards too. I still kept it
Well,
seems like it's only been very recent. It's been a while since I've done a record cover. It seems like that has, but then people don't put out records, you know,
yeah,
or
no, no.
much fewer. But yeah, I was surprised how even up to like 5 years ago, how often I was actually doing record covers.
Wow. Yeah. Well, and did illustrating record covers get old for you, or was it just something I always enjoyed?
No, yeah, I love it. I love doing record covers, you
Yeah.
know. Be nice if more often than not I did drew covers for records that I actually liked. Well, the thing is, my you know, of course you could think of great examples of music that fits this description, but I would describe most of the covers I've done, I would describe the music not even as grunge, but as garage music, garage rock.
hmm
It was so grungy, very lo-fi, grungy, noisy.
hmm
But my interest in that is pretty limited. It's not
hmm
like I hate it, but I understand why those people hire me, and that is because my drawing style suits that kind of music. You
Yeah.
know, it goes with it. Whereas
hmm
my taste in music is more Beatles and Beach Boys. But
Sure.
people who create that kind of music, they don't want my artwork. You know,
hmm
they want something prettier. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I guess you're right. Yeah, it's interesting how a visual style becomes emblematic of a particular moment or genre of music. When you think about it, they're not really, there's no real necessity behind it, but I guess the aura and the image that comes to mind when you think of uh grunge or garage rock or punk rock or whatever is a style that might be more suitable. I mean, I suppose, but it's just interesting because it's not necessary, I mean, it's not necessary that grunge rock look a certain way in illustrations or whatnot, but it gravitates to certain things. Um,
Yeah.
but so you're in Seattle, the work is Hate is moving along, it's doing really, really well. Um, you decide though, and this is after like Hate and Buddy Bradley and Buddy's whole life, everybody associated with Buddy is now associated with Seattle and that whole scene, and you decide at that point to pick up Buddy and move him to New Jersey.
Yes. Well, the main reason I did that was with those early hates, as popular as they were, I found it always being about, you know, here's Buddy's a 20 something. Everything that's going on is about him and his immediate friends, his peers, who also were all 20 somethings.
hmm
And I wanted to get children and old people into the story. I wanted to really mix it up. So I thought, well, how can I do that? Because it wouldn't make any sense for Buddy's entire family to move to Seattle. That
No.
wasn't going to happen. So what would have been much easier is move Buddy back to where he came from. So
hmm
then, you know, he has a niece and nephew. He's got his parents. And just that kind of made it much, I felt like it gave me a lot more story ideas to work with. And it did.
Oh
And
yeah.
also make it deeper. Part of me, not many other people seem to be conscious of this, but when with those early hates, I was thinking, okay, there's a lot of this. He's sort of kind of bouncing back and forth between these two girls, Lisa and Valerie.
Right.
And then he has like a nerdy friend, George, and a bad boy friend, Stinky. And then I thought, this is Archie. This is Archie comics. I'm doing Archie. And of course, on the surface, it doesn't
No.
seem at all like, but the guts of it. But at the same time, I was also embarrassed to know that's something that people liked. they
Mhm.
like people, the readers loved that love triangle, and they
Right.
loved his relationship between with his nerdy friend and his bad boy friend, and all of that push and pull. But it was nothing. I mean, I guess that's why Archie's been so successful all of these
Yeah, yeah,
decades.
right. Even still, I mean, amazing.
Yeah.
But well, when you have a love triangle, right, that's always, yeah, a compelling story. Uh,
Yes.
people always gravitate to those. I mean, it's been and whether you set out to use that as a template or not, uh, it's been used a zillion times in popular entertainment and
Yeah,
film.
no, like television. When you're watching a TV show and there'll be like a couple and the audience is like, will they or won't they?
Yep, yep,
Are they gonna get married? But you also know it's like once two of the characters commit
yeah,
and get married, the show's over. It's gonna
yeah,
start sucking.
yeah, exactly, exactly. You know, my wife and I have just been rewatching, well, actually, watching through Northern Exposure. Talk about the '90s. And we watched it the first few seasons back in the day, and then when we moved to New York, we stopped watching it. But so now we're watching the whole thing through, and it's just interesting because the whole premise of the show depends on whether Joel Fleischman gets together with Maggie O'Connell or not. And once that happens, there's this sort of air that goes out of the show. The same thing was true with Cheers, Sam and Diane. As soon as it, but nevertheless, that didn't really happen though in Hate. The relationships are a little too volatile. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Well, I had him. Lisa followed Buddy
yeah,
to back to Jersey.
right.
And then I just had Lisa kind of lose her mind.
Yeah,
But now they're normal. Once I
right.
made that, I gave them a kid in the Hate annuals, and then they became, you know, I mean, still wacky stuff still happened, but they were at the bottom line was they were functional.
Yeah,
And yeah, and
yeah.
I could just tell for that reason alone that people were starting to get bored. They,
I have to. This is one thing that is a larger issue, but I have to say your characterizations. I mean, one of the things for me that makes it such a rich series is that right from the beginning, right from the get-go, these characters are so distinctive and so unique and so authentic. All of them, all the way through, male and female characters, they all read as real people. You get to relate to them, as crazy as they are, as lunatic as they are. Their motivations, their thought process, their responses, their reactions to one another. There's something that's understandable in each and every one of the characters, as crazy as they may be, or as self-centered as they may be. Um, all the way through, you have this real great knack for creating really visceral, alive characters. And
oh, well,
so
thanks a lot.
and
And
it's
and
so true.
and, and with this new series, this little mini series that just came out, hadn't worked with a lot, especially with somebody like Stinky. I hadn't drawn him in ages, um, and it all just came right back.
Yeah.
Working with them, it was like it really flowed. I didn't have to stop and think for a second. What would Stinky do now? What would he say now? It
Mhm.
all just came flowing out of me. So
And as exaggerated a character as he is, right? He's still like you read that dialogue and he's still somebody who you understand. It's not like he seems completely out of nowhere. He doesn't seem like an alien landed here from some other, or an
right,
exaggeration to the point of which, he's just a caricature.
right,
He's much more understandable still,
right.
as
And
crazy.
in this miniseries I have coming out, I have several flashback stories with him in it,
Mhm.
and so it gives you more idea about where he came from. You get some origins of Stinky
Oh,
tidbits in there.
okay.
But what's funny to me, what's interesting, I have to say, is what I'm writing about, things that Stinky is saying and doing are things that happened. You're going to read this and say this can't be true, and it's all true. It's
Oh,
all things so that's why I wish you could have read the whole four issues so we could talk about it then.
oh
If
gosh, yeah, I would
you
love
want
to.
to
Yeah.
call
Well,
me back,
yeah, well, no, we this would be fun to do actually. I would love to talk once I've read all four of them. That would be fantastic. Because there's a lot, I'm sure, to talk about in that in related in regard to how the characters develop, and then some of these stories that you're referring to. So one of the things that always comes to my mind while I'm thinking about hate is, okay, well, and I think you've mentioned it in some point or another, that obviously your wife and your daughter, right? I don't know how many kids you have now, but they're around, and this you're working on this material, and you're dealing with all of these unsavory thoughts that
Oh,
run through your characters' minds,
right.
particularly some regarding the opposite sex. And I'm just wondering, how your wife, did she read this material, and how did she feel about, the dialogue you were writing for all these characters? Did she
Oh,
find it funny or?
she thinks it's all funny. She still does. She thinks it's all very funny.
Mhm.
Um, a question that I get asked, and so she is asked it too, is if she's the inspiration for either Lisa or Valerie.
Valerie, yeah.
And because of that, she would look for it, you
Uh-huh.
know. And I said, there's things you've done and said that's in both of them, but you are, she's not completely either of them, you
Uh-huh.
know. Thank
Right.
God.
I know, I was gonna say.
Yeah, but sometimes she'll see, sometimes she'll definitely see herself in the way, Lisa's portrayed here and there,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Little bits here and there, but
Yes.
you find a way. Well, and is this true of like other people you've known? Are they sometimes the basis
Well,
for
yeah, sure. I mean, that's true of every writer, It's people it's all gonna work its way into the storylines. Like recently, I did a signing at the Fantagraphics bookstore for the first issue just this Saturday.
hmm
So there's the copies of it right there, and I'm talking to the guy that runs the Fantagraphics bookstore, who is a guy named Larry Reed, who's I've known him forever. He's a real character. And I'm flipping through it, and I said, "See this panel here? Do you remember something you said that inspired this panel?" He goes, oh yeah, I spotted it." And I can't remember what it was too, but I found another. Gary Groth was there, and I found something. I said, "Does this ring a bell?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about." Yeah.
So
And
you never know.
in the past too, like I remember, because the Bradleys are not in every way, but in many ways are based on my own family, of course.
hmm hmm
And they never said anything. It's funny, my siblings never said anything about it. But so one time, at some point, I remember just asking them. I said, "You read my comics, right?" And they go, "Yeah." And I said, "Do you recognize yourselves or my family in there?" And they go, "Yeah, of course." But but that was it. That's all they had to say about it. They go, "Yeah, yeah, of course I did." But they didn't get mad or anything. But it's like, yeah, no, I knew what that was all about.
How do you sometimes respond, or how did you respond, in the past to people who would write you who were offended by something that somebody said or somebody did in the books? I mean, was just something that rolled off your back and you just continued, or
Well, it's especially if and I can only think of a few instances, but where if it's just one person complaining about something when nobody else
Mhm,
was offended by it at all, then it's easy to blow them off.
mhm,
Um, there's a few times where it seemed like there were several people complaining about the same thing. So it would give me pause, of course. It's like, did I miss something? Was I being insensitive in a way? Was I really expressing, am I callous about a certain subject?
mhm.
But I always wind up giving myself a pass. And it's like, no, it's them. Even if it's a bunch of them, they're on some kick. They all read the same article in some magazine.
All of a sudden, people focus on one issue or something like that because, yeah,
Yeah.
because an article came out. The stories that take place in New Jersey, in the family home and whatnot, are really interesting for the reasons that you brought up. I think of not only the changes in life that Buddy's mother goes through, but also Buddy's father is an interesting character. The way initially he starts off, you're not sympathetic to him, at least I wasn't initially. Uh, I kind of had that initial he put me off initially in the way that Lisa kind of was initially put off by him, but then Lisa finds something about him that she pulls out of him, I think, and that makes him a much more human character. Uh,
Right.
and
Well,
that
I think in those issues that you like when they moved to New Jersey,
yeah,
well, his health started to fail a
yeah,
bit,
yeah.
and so that made him all of a sudden that made him perhaps for the first time in his life made him a sympathetic character. It
Mhm.
made him by definition vulnerable,
Yeah.
and she just was like, well, here's a guy that used to be a blowhard. He was the patriarch of the family, throwing his weight around, but now he's not doing so good, and if I take care of him, then he needs me, you
Hmm.
know? I mean, that's something that happens a lot with a lot of people, how quickly a health crisis can change the dynamics of a whole family.
Yes, and it changed Lisa too, which was interesting because prior to that, we really didn't, have that sense of Lisa as a character.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, she grows through that process too.
Right.
And which
Yes.
is interesting. Again, it's one of the reasons why I think, hate still has a devoted following that it does. It has to do with, not only the humor and but also the depth of the characters and how relatable they are in all of their absurdity. They're characters that are very real and understandable and relatable.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I love them. I really do. I love them
Right.
all, and
Yeah.
with all their faults, and I love the storytelling, and I love the way, all of the developments that have happened over the years are really interesting to me, including these later developments in their lives, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens in the new series.
We'll have to revisit, like the title of the comic.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So do you have any idea how well it's doing? That first issue, I'm sure the order.
Well, yeah, I didn't ask for exact numbers, but my editor of Fantagraphics told me that they were very pleased with the orders, and they're going to reprint this first issue. It
Oh,
sold out.
that's
Yeah, so yeah,
fantastic.
but I'm sure that they didn't print it in the numbers that the old ones were printed in, but that's good as long as they gave me this advance, so I hope they make their money back.
And I hope so any word from Spain? Who was the impetus
No,
behind?
well, the Spanish edition hasn't come out yet.
Oh, okay.
But the Spanish market, they don't do comic books.
Okay.
So they are eventually Fantagraphics will put out all these stories in a graphic novel. It'll all come out together in a book collection
Sure.
eventually, like
Sure.
early next year.
Hmm.
Spain is going to do that right away.
Hmm.
So the translator he only had just finished translating it, so it probably won't be it'll probably be a month from now when that version comes out. But I know my Spanish publisher, they're convinced that it'll do well for them. So
Hmm. Right.
yeah, it's like my stuff is their best-selling title, they
Oh,
tell me. So
fantastic.
for this particular publisher, which again makes me wonder about what's wrong with the French and the Italians and the Germans. Why Spain?
I don't know.
Yeah,
It's really interesting. I don't know. It's good. Well, I think as you pointed out earlier, your translator really
yeah,
has a particular sensitivity,
yeah,
and seems to be really. I would hazard a guess makes it that much more relatable to the audience there.
sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, gosh, this has been terrific. I've had so much fun talking with you, Peter. It's
Yeah, no, I enjoyed this too.
yeah, a lot of fun. Even though we've
Yeah,
digressed, we've gone all over the place. It's been a lot of fun and really enjoying. I've
yeah.
really enjoyed speaking with you. So I'm looking forward to doing it again. And I'm going to encourage everybody to go out and pick up Hate Revisited.
Oh,
Yeah,
well, great.
yeah.
All
So
right.
what
Well, so we'll talk again soon then.
Hey, that was great, wasn't it? It was really nice to sit down and talk to Peter and talk about Buddy Bradley and his friends and find out what's going on and really talk about Peter's career in general, as well as just about everything else under the sun. I hope that you found that as interesting as I did, our digressions as well. It was just natural. That was the flow of the conversation, and I enjoyed it, and I think Peter enjoyed it. So I hope you did, and I hope that came across as well. In the meantime, be sure to get your hands on Hate Revisited #1, which is at your local comic shop as we speak. And put in your orders for Hate #2, Hate Revisited #2, Hate Revisited 3 and 4, which will be out in successive months over the summer, July, August, and then September. It's sure to be just as wonderful as Hate has always been, and I'm looking forward to it. I've got my issue of Hate Revisited. It arrived yesterday, and I'm looking forward to diving into that as soon as I get a minute away from everything that I'm doing right now, which includes the Kickstarter, which is up until July 17th at daiquirijones.com. It is something I am really excited about. It is some of the best work I think I've ever done. Each page is a challenge. Each page is exciting. Because it is meant to be read as like one installment. It's a singular thing, so you conceive of each page in that way as like a singular work of art. Not to make too grandiose a claim for it, but that's what it's like. It's like each page is individual and distinct, so you're not thinking in terms of a book, you're thinking in terms of each page and how each page is organized and composed, and how it can go from beginning to end, as well as continue a larger story. So there's a big challenge there, but it's a really exciting challenge, and I'm enjoying every minute of it as much as it's really pushing my creativity to the limit in that sense, because it's a different way of thinking about how to tell a story. You can check out what I'm doing at Green Screen Comic on Instagram, and you can find me on Kara now. I think it's at Geoff Grogan on Kara, which is where all of us creators seem to be moving, trying to get away from AI and its impending encroachment upon Instagram. But you can also find out more about this exciting Kickstarter. Join the team there at daiquirijones.com. That's DAIQIRI Jones.com, and all of the info will be in the show notes. I want to take a moment to thank my latest supporter at patreon.com/Geoff Grogan. Brian Kidwell joins us. Hi, Brian, out there. I know you're listening. He's a fan of the show, and he's become a supporter. So that I'm so excited about that. So excited to have Brian join. And a very special gift is winding its way to Brian as we speak. Brian, I can't tell you how much that means to me to have your support. So join Brian, join us there at patreon.com/Geoff Grogan, or if you're not up for doing that, hey, join in the Kickstarter at daiquirijones.com. And as always, thank you for whatever level of support you can give. Even if you share the information, that's a big help too. We've got a couple of great guests lined up. I can't tell the names to you right now because I haven't finalized the details, but I'm very excited about both of these folks that should be coming your way very shortly. It won't be another month. It'll be a couple of weeks probably before I get the next installment of Blockhead out there, but I am really excited about both of these guests. They're really great cartoonists, and it's very exciting. So can't wait to share that with you. Thanks for being here with Peter and myself today. Thanks for joining Blockhead. I hope everything is great with you. And in the meantime, be well, be happy, be safe. And thanks, as always, for listening. I'll see you next time.